my channel, where we question everything. Today's topic is military affairs. And I'm going to talk about a very sensitive subject. So please show some patience and hear me out my arguments. And the topic is NATO a defensive alliance? And my argument is yes, without a doubt. And then now here comes my argument. But first, before we start, just look at the history. You should all know is NATO was created after the Second World War in the Western countries of Europe and included America. And it was in necessity to create it as a buffer towards the Soviet Union, who had a similar construct called the Warsaw Pact. And basically it stated that we will all stand together and defend our nation should one of us be attacked by, well, if you're NATO, by the Russian, and if you're a Soviet, then by any Western country. And that was the purpose of NATO. And then we all know that the Soviet Union collapsed and communism collapsed and the Warsaw Pact was dissolved. But instead of NATO being dissolved as well, NATO still remained. And there was a fair good reason for that. And that is where the whole argument lies. See, NATO was a defensive pact to be a buffer against the Warsaw Pact and the threat of the Soviet Union invading Europe. And when the Soviet Union collapsed, then the Western world has asked itself, but why should we dissolve? We have this agreement, so why don't we go ahead? And yes, I know there's a narrative that says, yeah, the people want to create a job for themselves and keep the money flowing. And yeah, but I think the budget of NATO is about $2 billion or less dollars per year. And it's small fry compared to the amount of members that are involved in NATO itself. And then the question arises, why do I say it's a defensive pact? Well, you can look at a map of NATO. And I have shown it before. This is a map basically showing all the countries that are involved in NATO. And you can see it's a fairly huge number. A significant part of the developed Western world. It encompasses more than 780 million people. It has, well, the combined EU GDP is more or less the same as the Americans. So we're talking about an economies of a GDP of $40 trillion. That's a huge economic machine. And it's a question of, and then it had the functions of, you know, a threatening. It's like when it, you know, it allows anybody that sits in this alliance to, like a cat, when a cat tries to defend itself or intimidate its enemy, it puffs its hair and it stands like that. That same thing is also happening in fishes like the blowfish, and you know, birds do it in order to puff themselves up to look bigger. Snakes do it. A lot of animals try to increase their size to become more of a deterrent. Don't attack me. And that is what NATO in effect is, a deterrent. And it keeps Russia in place. And it keeps anybody that might think of being aggressive in place. Don't attack a NATO country. Then you will have to do with this whole block. And I've also showed you many times that, let me first go on. But then something unfortunately went wrong. America took command and thought that it has now conquered the Soviet Union and it's a sole power. Europe thought, why should we invest in weapons and in military expenditure? Because military expenditure is usually a waste. It's a huge waste of resources and money, manpower, and so on. They would rather build up the economies and the welfare of the people, and therefore you will find that the contribution, the military contribution of the European countries to NATO was always below that what was required. Remember, the requirement is 2% of GDP. And none of these countries have basically done. And they felt they basically used America on the one hand to provide the military and provide the expenditures on military hardware and infrastructure. And basically they became, how would I describe it? Like a shark. You have the shark, and then you have the small fishes that sort of always swim next to him, and then they take these morsels, leftovers by a shark and so on. Well, that small fishes, that is what Europe was. But they had to pay a price for that, and that is they became semi-dependent on the American military machine. And because the Americans had no proper enemy anymore, he decided to abuse NATO for its own purpose. And then under the name of NATO, he basically tried to legitimize his attacks on various countries that were not in agreement or in lock and step, is that the right English saying, of America, typically like Saddam Hussein. He was first an American friend, and then he pulled the plug, and then he became the enemy when he to the US when he wasn't doing anymore what they wanted him to do. And Gaddafi in Libya was always a problem for them, for America. And America would have liked to invade Iran, but that's going to be a very dangerous operation, and the losses, the risk versus benefit is not big enough. And then we had Afghanistan, which was more like a PR thing as a revenge action for 9/11. And Syria was also a more a threat to Israel, and that's why Syria became a target. And that's why we had all these military conflicts. But we all know that this whole story has actually begun with the Serbian bombing in 1998 by NATO. Well, that was a different situation, actually. Let me finish the talk about these other wars. Basically, so America abused the NATO's and its position in NATO and dependence of all the other members on the military power of America to legitimize its attacks. And this means actually that if you lose NATO per se, according to his action, you can say it's an offensive institution. But no, it's still a defensive institution. It's just being abused and misused by the Americans. Not by the whole member countries of NATO, only by the Americans that are abusing it. So technically, NATO is still a defensive organization. The current stories in Ukraine is also viewed as an aggressive, offensive type of operation. And Stoltenberg says that if Ukraine loses and Russia wins, then that is defeat for NATO and all of that. But Stoltenberg is just a puppet. He's a nobody, really. He says what he's told to say, as long as he keeps to the narrative. It's again an abuse of the American strength. No, not battle. American. Not American fight, not American battle. Come on, people. dispute, no hegemony. No, it's not. None of those words actually matter. The point here is that America wants to keep its dominant position in the world and its financial position and sustain the American way of life. And Russia and China has become existential for the continuation of that preferential position of America. So America has to commit to Ukraine, and America convinced the European nation to that is also existential for them, and they have to support the whole thing. But it's a misuse of NATO. Because at the end of the day, if you really look what it is, it's defensive. And why is it defensive? Because Russia makes every single effort to prevent a conflict in Ukraine and escalation of the conflict and an escalation that NATO gets involved. Because he knows that attacking a NATO country will mobilize all the nations and all the industries and all the military and all the weapons, and those are huge numbers, and then that would be carnage. And also what I would like to say, point out the whole story is, like, look at Syria. So Assad and Syrian government were basically losing the fight against ISIS. He asked Russia for assistance. Russia moved his weapon systems and some of his troops to Syria and helped the Syrian government. But in the meantime, there are American troops also stationed in Syria, and they are illegal there. They shouldn't be there. But has anybody ever attacked those American troops? Yes, there were some attacks, but we never know who the attacks were actually done by. So it's difficult for Americans to retaliate and identify the source. But the point here is Americans are legally there. So technically the Syrian army has the full 100% right to attack those bases of the Americans and chase them out of the country. But do you see them doing it? No. Because they know that if they attack the American forces there, they attack America. And if they attack America, then it comes NATO. And that is the point of a defensive alliance. The fact that you commit offensive action doesn't change the idea behind it. It just shows you that you're either abusing it. You are abusing your position of strength and your agreements with other people, with other countries. That is what you are doing. So the point here is, it's a preventative action. It's a show of force. It is a don't even think about attacking me. It's a threat, basically. And that's why it's still defensive. But it has been abused. And now I just wanted to quickly, shortly discuss the story about Serbia. Yes, the point here is that before Serbia-Kosovo war, there was Bosnia-Herzegovina wars and internal conflicts, and those were also bad. And the Western world, Europe, didn't know what to do. They were not used to, they didn't know how to resolve the conflict. They felt they had to enter it, but they couldn't. They didn't really want to put their soldiers' lives at risk and stuff like that, and what. And then there were a lot of atrocities committed by both sides. And then finally there was some political settlement, and there was peace in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And now there's a sham of a government system that is still unstable, doesn't resolve the problems after 30 years. But in any case, so Bosnia was the front runner, and the European Union didn't know what to do. And then the Kosovo story happened with Serbia. And then the European Union had to do something. America and NATO decided they had to do something, but again, they didn't know what to do. And Americans, being the military superior and being full of themselves, thought only one way is, let's bomb the crap out of Serbia. And that is what they did. Was it the right thing to do? No. Was it but they had to do something, and that's the only thing that came up and do it. So it's not really being an aggressive part of NATO itself, it's just that those people didn't know what to do and how to handle it, and then they made the mistake of committing military force to Serbia and then bombing all the infrastructure and civilian people in Serbia, and well, we know what happened. And then they sent in the NATO forces, KFOR, into Kosovo, and there they have been for how many years now? 20, 25 years? No, 20, yeah, 24 years. So how can there be peace if there are still NATO troops in Kosovo, by the way? But that's something different. The point here is, again, everybody will be afraid to attack NATO. That is why Finland and Sweden have joined it. You know, actually, I had to laugh. I don't want to really do this anymore and so on. But there was, Larry Johnson had a talk with the Gaggle, George and Peter and so on. And then Larry made the stupid remark that, yeah, the only reason for expansion of NATO was to gain new troops because the existing Western world were not prepared to field any soldiers and citizens' life, and thereby they incorporated Romania and Poland and Lithuania and so on. But anyway, these countries are more wagging the dog, tail wagging the dog. But that's a different point, but it's a ridiculous type of analysis. Can't even, when I heard it, I couldn't even believe it. But in any case, so why did NATO expand? Well, NATO still has this idea of defending Europe against Russia. They still associate Russia with the Soviet Union. And if you look at the Soviet Union, yes, Soviet Union was actually Russia. And so it's not that far-fetched belief and so on. So what they did is they tried to incorporate as many countries as possible to the east of the original Iron Curtain. And the more they can get them, then the bigger they will get, and the possibility of Russia having other joints, other agreements becomes smaller. So that's a natural defensive. And also, if they could have used Ukraine, then they could have stationed missiles in Ukraine nearer to Moscow, and that would have been a better defensive line. The problem here is that that was effectively the wrong decision, because now, if you look at the insulation, but now what you have done is now you have threatened Russia, and you have threatened his security. So you went one step too far. You miscalculated, NATO miscalculated in their simplified narrative. The bigger they get, the stronger they will get. The further they worse to the east, the more they can counter Russia. And unfortunately, it has become a point of risk versus return. The risk is too high, so Russia had to commit to the SMO and now insists on the security guarantees from the West, because that is what the threat is. But at the end of the day, security guarantees are not really necessary. I mean, is there a security guarantee between, say, Thailand and Malaysia? Is there a security guarantee between Singapore and Hong Kong? Or Thailand, Vietnam? There are no security guarantees. There's no security guarantee between Australia and, say, Samoa Islands. It's only when there's a threat. And the only threat here in Europe is NATO and the European countries. So if NATO dissolves and there's no military build-up in either Russia or in Europe, then there is no need for the security guarantees, because nobody is really aggressive and nobody threatens anybody else. So again, the security guarantee is just a human construct. It's not really a necessity if both parties play ball. But in this case, NATO is not playing ball, and therefore it is a requirement for Russia. And that is also correct. So there are various easy options to resolve this whole conflict and issue. But the West is not going to do it, because the West is at this stage in the decline. It has to suck the world dry of resources in order to maintain their living standard, their fake limit. They have to have the world subsidizing their living standard, and they know it's going to come to an end. It's basically coming to an end. So there's no hope for basically resolving the issue. Anyways, that's my story. Just remember, it's still a defensive organization. It's just being abused. So if you like what you heard, spread the word, subscribe, tell your friends, and until next time, cheers.